So we've been having some discussions here lately. It's become a pretty big thing on the channel, okay? Okay, pretty big thing is like UK versus US over here. And I don't know, I've come to find out that I really don't know anything about England, okay? But what I do know is that England is not invading anything, okay? It's not invading anything. But what we're gonna do today is we're gonna find out, okay? Because obviously chat wants to prove a lot of things wrong to me. You hear him? So let's go ahead and dive into this video, man. If you guys haven't already subscribed to the channel, go ahead and do so, okay? We have a lot of fun over here, pretty much just going back and forth. It's great. I love it. Also live over here every day, twitch.tv/JoeNoJoseph. Come on, let's have some fun.
For a good chunk of the past few centuries, this music was the final boss music played for people across the entire world. The English and later the British have been responsible for invading and conquering more countries and people than any other nation in human history. And honestly, it's startling just how many places they've been to. In this video, I'm going to do my best at attempting to visualize all of Britain's invasions and conquests for you, continent by continent, in as brief a time as possible. So let's begin with the closest continent to Britain, Europe. Ireland was the first target.
So how come Britain is like so pussy now? That's so crazy.
Of British conquests and was invaded as early as 1169. Within 400 years of gradual conquests, the entire island was ruled by the British and remained that way until most of it was granted independence in 1921. Historically, France has probably been invaded by the English more times than any other country in the world.
Damn.
Just take a look at this huge list of invasions. There's not even enough time to talk about a third of these, and for a
oh my god, that's just for France? Niggas didn't care about the French at all.
huge list of invasions. There's not even enough time to talk about a third of these, and for a time, all of this territory inside of modern France was directly controlled by the English, with Calais being the final piece that fell in 1557. Well, except for that time when the British took over Corsica for a couple years. The British continued to invade Spain by the millions every winter, but in the past, they've come with a lot less friendly intentions. English and later British soldiers invaded under the Black Prince in 1367 and continued on through the first, second, third, and fourth raids on Cadiz and that time when the British took over Gibraltar and Minorca. They gave Minorca back, but decided on keeping Gibraltar forever. In recent history, the British have invaded Belgium in order to support the Belgians, but that wasn't always the case. They conducted two pretty large-scale invasions of modern-day Belgium in 1654 and again in 1701, and Flanders itself was ruled by the English for a few years in the 14th century. The Netherlands was one of England's historical arch-rivals, and so there's been plenty of invasions going in this direction across the 17th and 18th centuries. In 1940, the British technically invaded and took over Iceland peacefully for a year in order to prevent it from falling into the hands of the Germans. But this was heavily protested by the Icelandic government at the time, so in my books, it still counts as an invasion. Italy,
wait, how do you peacefully take over? So in order to
prevent it from falling into the hands of the Germans.
So in order to prevent Germany from getting closer to England, right? They came over and helped these people, Iceland, basically not get invaded. Is that pretty much what happened? That's pretty much what he's saying.
But this was heavily
badass when you think about
the Icelandic government at the time, so in my books, it still counts as an invasion. Italy, of course, was invaded by the British Army during the Second World War as well in 1943, but there were plenty of invasions before then, dating back to Richard the Lionheart's invasion in 1190. Germany, too, was obviously invaded by the British Army in 1945, and northwestern Germany was occupied by the British for 3 years until 1948. But a lot of German territory was ruled by Britain long before then. The islands of Heligoland were British for most of the 19th century, and the Kingdom of Hanover was effectively ruled ruled under a personal union for over a century between 1714 and 1837. Austria was also invaded in 1945, and the southwest of the country was occupied for a decade. Norway was invaded in 1810 and 1812 during the Napoleonic Wars, when it was a part of Denmark-Norway because Denmark was aligned to France, so obviously Denmark was invaded during that time as well. Finland, Estonia, and Latvia were all briefly invaded by small units during the Crimean War against Russia because they were all part of the Russian Empire at the time, and of course, Russia itself was invaded then too, as well as in 1918 when the British...
It's so crazy because, like, in my head, right? In my head, the only thing that, like, actually exists is, like, Russia, China, America. Like, and then there's, like, everything else is, like, England. Like, that's where my head goes. Everything else is, like, that's, like, some UK shit over there, you know? Like, that's where my head is, I swear. I'm like... It sounds so crazy, but in my head, I'm like, you got China, we got fucking China, which is basically like all the Asians, you know what I mean? All of Asia. You got Asia, you got Russia, you got Britain, okay? And then like Britain is just all of that. That's where like if I was to draw a map, you guys would be like, what the fuck? What?
British took over a large chunk of northern Russia for a time in their fight against the Bolsheviks. The territory of modern Ukraine was invaded by British army units during the Crimean War. The British took over the Croatian island of Vis between 1807 and 1814 during their fight against Napoleon. The British army had boots and guns on the ground in Bosnia recently between 1992 and 95, fighting against the Bosnian Serbs, and around the same time, the RAF also carried out bombing strikes against Serbian Serb targets in Serbia in 1999. Montenegro was briefly blockaded and invaded in 1913 during the First Balkan War. The British owned the westernmost Ionian islands of Greece between 1815 and 1863 before they gave them back, while Bulgaria was invaded and almost entirely occupied by the British Army between 1918 and 1919 at the end of World War I. Cyprus was a British protectorate between 1878 and 1914 when they decided to just outright annex it to piss off the Turks, and it remained annexed until 1960.
I will not be drawing a map. It will not. Oh, there's too much stuff, bro. There's too much stuff that you guys want to do that will stay on the internet forever, okay? Even if I eventually learn it, I cannot. Some of this shit can't get out, okay? Like, I have dreams here, okay, of eventually like actually like going viral, you know what I'm saying, getting bigger, and if that happens and people see all this shit, oh, it's gonna do it when Altoid is here though. Don't do it when Altoid is here. Bro, that would be fucked up. Altoid would be so pissed.
Except for two small chunks that are still British today. Turkey itself was...
I'm definitely leaving this in the video just so that he can see this.
massively invaded by the British during World War I, and part of it was occupied between 1919 and 1923. That wraps up Europe, so let's move on to Asia next.
Oh man, I love that
Modern-day
nigga,
Israel
bro.
and Palestine, as well as Jordan, were British controlled from the end of World War I to 1948 and 1946, respectively. Lebanon and Syria were both occupied from the Vichy French government briefly during World War II. Iraq was ruled between 1919 and 1932 and invaded again during the Second World War, and again in 1991, and again in 2003. Kuwait was a colony for over 60 years until—
Oh my God! I don't know. So we just been going crazy in Iraq for years? That's crazy, bro. It's obviously a different one, but that's crazy, bro.
Georgia and Azerbaijan were both invaded and occupied right at the end of World War I for a year. Iran has been invaded at least 3 times, with the most notable example being the joint Anglo-Soviet invasion of 1941. Turkmenistan was invaded in 1918 to prevent Bolshevik influence from spreading any further. Afghanistan is a favorite British invasion spot.
Hey, sorry, sicko, but only mods have access for the exclamation point channel alerts, bro.
since it's been invaded in 1839, 1878, 1919, and again in 2001. Qatar, Bahrain, the United Arab Emirates, and Oman were all controlled by the British until the early 1970s, while a chunk of Yemen was controlled for over a century between 1839 and 1967. India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and Sri Lanka were all, of course, invaded many times and outright ruled by the British Empire in parts for nearly 2 centuries between 1757 and 1947. Nepal was invaded in 1814 but never successfully conquered. Bhutan was invaded in 1772 and again in 1864 and was sort of conquered as a protectorate between 1910 and 1948. Burma/Myanmar was invaded in 1826 and was definitely successfully conquered and ruled through 1947. Thailand was briefly invaded in 1945 since they were allied to Japan in World War II, and so was Vietnam in the same year, but that was to support the French government against the growing independence movement. Malaysia and Singapore were each conquered and ruled up until the 1950s and 1960s. Brunei was conquered and ruled up until the 1980s, whereas the Philippines were briefly invaded during the 7 Years' War. China got invaded a lot, and Hong Kong was a colony until as recently as 1997. And while not outright invaded, part of Japan was occupied following World War II between 1946 and—
Bro, this is so crazy. I don't understand how does Shorty— sorry, I said Shorty because I just read Pokemon thing. But when were the British this crazy, bro? When were they going this crazy? Were the Redcoats going that hard back in the day? I don't remember this. You said Pokemon just mentioned me. Oh my God. Really?
and 1952. And finally, Indonesia was invaded a bunch during the Napoleonic Wars since it was a Dutch colony aligned to France at the time. Next up, Oceania. Australia and New Zealand, of course, were invaded by the British and established as colonies that each gained independence in 1931. Papua New Guinea was also a British colony for a time, as were the island—
Bro, it's so crazy because, like, you guys used to be so powerful and now y'all are just drunks, you know? Like, what else is there? It's just, you know, like, there's a couple of good ones, you know, but I mean, what else? Like, all Americans do is shoot up schools, and all British people do is go to the pub, you know, maybe put a little bit of shrimp on the barbie. Wait, is that British? I think that was Australian or New Zealand. I just crossed over crazy. Sicko, get out of here.
Countries of Fiji, Kiribati, the Solomon Islands, Tuvalu, and Vanuatu. Let's move back over to Africa next, which the British have violently visited a lot. In terms of just places the British outright colonized after invasions, there's the Gambia, Sierra Leone, Ghana, Nigeria, Egypt, Sudan, South Sudan, Uganda, Kenya, Tanzania, Zambia, Malawi, Zimbabwe, Botswana, Namibia, and South Africa, along with parts of modern-day Somalia and Guinea. Senegal—
So they pretty much just took over all of the places that were, like, not necessarily thriving, but that could thrive. Damn, that's kind of crazy. What happened? What happened? How did they lose everything? Or were they just like, we'll be nice now?
War, the British invaded the French
so
colonies of Djibouti, Madagascar, and Comoros after they aligned themselves with the Nazi Vichy regime, and the Italian colonies of Libya, Eritrea, and Ethiopia, although they had also invaded Ethiopia much earlier in 1868. And as German colonies right before World War I, the British also invaded Togo and Cameroon without annexing them afterwards. For the final area of the world left to discuss, let's move over to the Americas. All of Canada was a British colony until 1931, while Newfoundland remained until 1949. The United States, of course, was a colony until 1776, and was invaded again in 1812, and the modern states of Oregon and Washington were claimed right up until 1846. As far as other outright British colonies here go, there was the Bahamas, Jamaica, Belize, Grenada, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Barbados, St. Lucia, Dominica, Antigua and Barbuda, St. Kitts and Nevis, Trinidad and Tobago, and Guyana. Besides colonies, Cuba was invaded—
It's kind of crazy how, like, just from playing like a lot of these like strategy games and stuff like that recently, it makes so much sense why they took over like a lot of the like little places first, and why they like actually like tried to take over all of the little like islands and the little places surrounding, you know what I'm saying? So they could like port up, since a lot of stuff was, I'm pretty sure this was back in like the sea days, you know what I'm saying? Before niggas was flying jets and stuff. So now everybody's like on boats. So they needed like ports and all that kind of stuff. And then I'm pretty sure this probably like fucked up a lot of supply stuff as well. But then again, were niggas trading like that overseas back then? That wasn't happening, huh? I don't even know. God, dude, I need to take a history lesson. I feel like I forgot everything.
And occupied during the 7 Years' War in 1762. Haiti was invaded in 1793 during the French Revolutionary Wars. The Dominican Republic was invaded way back in 1655 in an attempt at conquest under Oliver Cromwell. Parts of the east coast of Honduras and Nicaragua were conquered and ruled for nearly 2 centuries until 1819. They sent the Navy to invade Mexico in 1861 to force them to repay some debts, and during the splendidly named War of Jenkins Year, aka the more lame-sounding War of the Austrian Succession, the British invaded a lot of Spain's colonies, including Panama, a huge one into Colombia, and ultimately Peru. In 1796, the British took over Suriname because it was a Dutch colony, and they were allied with the revolutionary French and later Napoleon. They also invaded Martinique and Guadeloupe because they actually were French during the Napoleonic Wars. Venezuela was invaded in 1902 as part of the so-called Venezuela crisis to force the country to repay some debts they had defaulted on, kind of like Mexico, while Argentina and Uruguay were both invaded during the Napoleonic Wars as well in 1806 when Spain and her colonies were still allied with Napoleon. And that...
Yo, it's so crazy because I would have definitely looked on a map and been like, yo, that's Africa. That's hella crazy, bro.
Pretty much sums up all of the territory the British have ever ruled and all of the countries this small island has ever invaded. There are a total of 65 countries today who celebrate their independence days from the British Empire. The Empire used to rule over a quarter of all the world's land at the same time and was the biggest empire in human history. And in total, today, there have been 117 modern countries that have been aggressively invaded by the British armed forces during some point in their histories, representing a total of 60% of all the world's nations, which is almost the same number of countries that you can watch this video in. YouTube is available in 130 countries now, or about 2/3 of them, but the algorithm that YouTube uses won't always work the way you think or want it to. It determines which videos succeed, which ones don't, and which ones you end up seeing recommended, but it doesn't always line up with the kinds of videos I'm producing here that I think you guys will end up enjoying watching. So that's why a big group of my educational creator friends
I just knew he was about to like go into like some crazy shit. Like I just knew it was about to be crazy. Okay? I'm like, oh, I'm so fucking I'm so annoyed. I'm so pissed. I just knew he was about to say something crazy, bro. Like, that's it. How did the video end right there? I feel like it just ended on like a cliffhanger. Like, what? God damn it, bro. I'm pissed. This is why England lost all their shit right here, bro. It's because niggas like this. It's because of niggas like this guy, bro. Oh my God. It's so fucking tight, dude. Why? What kind of ending was that, bro? He just put a fucking 45-second ad at the end of the video. Like, what the fuck? There's no way he thought that people were gonna sit through that. Why did he just wait till the end of the video to like throw a whole ad? Like, I was like really getting into that. I was really like, oh, it's about to be something crazy.